Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the case of Wilbur Lee Jennings, sometimes called the Ditchbank Murderer.
Ooh, that's a creepy nickname already.
Yeah, he was active in California in the early 80s. You sent over some excerpts from his Wikipedia article,
Okay.
and ready to get into all the chilling details, his crimes, his trial, and even the very unusual circumstances surrounding his death.
Yeah, I mean, that nickname, the Ditchbank Murderer, it's pretty evocative, right? Like it hints at a pattern in his
Mhm.
crimes, maybe his MO, or, as the name implies, where the bodies were found.
Yeah. So who was this guy?
Well, so Wilbur Lee Jennings, he was born in 1940,
Mm.
and he ended up convicted of killing at least 4 women,
At least four.
at least four,
Mm.
in Fresno and Sacramento between 1981 and 1984. And possibly, actually, he may have been linked to at least 6 murders.
6 murders. That's crazy. In just a few years. I mean, there must have been so much fear in those communities.
Right. And it makes you wonder how he was able to evade capture for so long. I mean, back then, forensic technology, wasn't what it is today.
Oh, yeah, totally. So it's like we always talk about how forensic science has come such a long way.
Hmm.
So what happened at his trial? Like, how did they even get a conviction?
Well, they had some pretty solid physical evidence. A baseball bat and a pipe, both covered in blood, were found with Jennings. And get this, the victims' families were actually able to identify them.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that right there directly linked him to the murders.
Yeah.
But also, there was a ton of witness testimony. I mean, relatives, friends, acquaintances, they all took the stand.
So did the defense try to discredit any of that testimony? I mean, it seems like if you have that many people, that many different accounts, that's got to be pretty hard to dispute.
Yeah, I mean, witness testimony isn't always reliable.
Yeah.
But in this case, it seems like the sheer number of people and the fact that their stories all lined up just created this really compelling case.
So what was the defense strategy then? Did they have an alternative theory? Did they try to blame someone else?
It's interesting, Jennings actually insisted that he was innocent
He did.
throughout the whole trial. He even accused the prosecutor of making witnesses lie. That's something you see sometimes, right?
Okay.
To try to create doubt.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold move.
Yeah, it is.
So what did the jury think?
Well, in November 1986, they found him guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to death.
Wow. I mean, that must have been, I don't know, some kind of relief for the families after all that. But then, 2005, it's like a twist in the plot. DNA testing linked Jennings to 2 more murders?
Right. A 76-year-old woman, Clarice Ranke, murdered in 1983, and then 17-year-old Debra Chandler in 1981.
Wait, hold on. He was already on death row for those other murders when they found this new evidence.
Exactly. It just goes to show you the power of DNA technology. All these cold cases that seemed unsolvable, now we have a chance to get answers.
So it's like justice delayed, but not denied.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier that one of these new cases, the Rinko case, was a little strange.
Yeah, they found DNA from Jennings, but also from another man, Alvin Johnson. And he was already in prison for a rape conviction.
Whoa. So was this guy an accomplice? Was there a bigger network here that we don't know about?
I don't know. That's a great question. But it's wild. Even with this new DNA evidence, Jennings still insisted he was innocent.
He denied it.
Completely.
Even with DNA evidence.
Hmm.
That is crazy. It's like, what was going on in his mind?
Hard to say. But it's worth noting that by this point, Jennings had developed prostate cancer and diabetes. And actually, because of his health problems, his trials for the Rankin Chandler murders kept getting postponed.
So he's dealing with serious health issues and new murder charges. It must have been a super stressful time.
Oh, for sure.
But then for the families, all these delays, it's like they were being denied justice again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's awful. I mean, to lose a loved one like that and then to have to wait for years to see justice done.
It's like there's all these layers to this case, and we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah. And it's important to remember, we're looking at all these details about his crimes in the trial.
Right.
But there's still so much we just don't know.
Yeah.
What was his childhood like? What made him, go down this dark path?
It's like you can get so caught up in trying to figure out the mind of a serial killer,
Yeah.
but it's dangerous territory, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to end up glorifying these horrible acts.
Totally agree. It's a fine line. We want to understand what leads someone to do these things.
Sure.
But we can't lose sight of the victims. Their stories are the ones that really matter.
Right. It's their lives that were tragically cut short, and their families are the ones left to deal with the pain.
Exactly. And even though the justice system may not have been able to hold Jennings accountable for everything, I mean, at least these advances in forensics helped bring those new connections to light. It gives you hope for other cold cases out there, you know?
That eventually there might be answers.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about those families, though. What kind of support did they get? How did they deal with such an unimaginable loss and then having to wait so long for answers?
It's a good point. These crimes, they have this ripple effect that goes way beyond just the victim. The trauma, the grief, the fear, families carry that for years and years.
We need to do better as a society to support those families. Like provide counseling, resources, make sure they have access to legal assistance.
Absolutely.
But it's more than that, too, right?
Yeah.
It's like we need to change the way we think about these things, create a culture where victims feel safe speaking out, where they know they'll be heard and believed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about shifting the focus from blaming the victims to actually holding the perpetrators accountable
Yeah.
and making the world safer for everyone.
It's complex. There are no easy answers. But it's the conversation we need to keep having. We've really dug into the darkness of this case, the brutality of the crimes, the legal battles, the lasting impact on the victims and their families. But I think it's important to end on a hopeful note. What can we learn from all of this? What can we do to make the world a more just and compassionate place?
Yeah, I mean, it's just awful to think about the pain that Jennings caused. We've talked a lot about the big picture, but it's important to remember, each of those victims had their own story, their own life that was cut short. What can you tell us about them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, each of these victims deserves to be remembered as individuals, not just statistics. One of the victims, Deborah Chandler, the one who was linked to Jennings through the DNA evidence, she was only 17 years old when she was murdered back in July of '81. And like a lot of his other victims, her body was found in an irrigation ditch just outside of Fresno.
17? That's just horrible. She had her whole life ahead of her. It really makes that nickname, the Ditchbank Murderer, even creepier, you know? Like he was using those ditches as dumping grounds, almost like he was trying to dehumanize them even more.
It's really disturbing, isn't it? The way he just discarded those victims. And then there was Clarice Reinke. She was 76 when she was murdered in June of '83.
That's a pretty big age difference between those two victims. Makes you wonder if there was some kind of pattern or if it was just random.
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure. I mean, from the information we have, it doesn't seem like he had a specific type that he targeted. It's a reminder that anyone can become a victim.
It's scary to think about. And going back to the Ranke case for a sec, that DNA evidence, it also pointed to that other guy, Alvin Johnson, the one who was already in prison for rape. What do you think about that? Was he an accomplice?
Well, it's definitely a possibility. The fact that his DNA was at the crime scene, it opens up a whole lot of questions. Like, was Johnson involved in any of those other murders? Did Jennings have other accomplices that we don't even know about? It's like a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder if there could be other victims out there who haven't been connected to Jennings yet.
It's possible.
I mean, DNA evidence is powerful, but it's not perfect, is it?
Right, exactly. There are limitations. DNA can be contaminated. It can be misinterpreted, sometimes even planted. It's a complex science, and it takes a lot of careful analysis to get it right. We can't just rely on DNA alone to solve these crimes. It's just one piece of the puzzle.
So we've got Jennings, convicted of multiple murders, linked to even more through DNA, and then this possibility of an accomplice. It's hard to wrap your head around it all. I mean, is there anything about Jennings' psychological profile, that might give us some clues about what drove him to do these things?
Unfortunately, the information you provided doesn't really go into his psychology in depth, which is a shame. But we do know that he always maintained that he was innocent, even when they confronted him with that DNA evidence. And remember, he even accused the prosecutor of, coercing witnesses. It sort of suggests maybe a lack of remorse or a distorted view of reality.
That is really interesting. It's like, what would make someone stick to their story so strongly, even when there's evidence that proves them wrong? Was he trying to control a situation, or did he actually believe that he was innocent?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, without a proper psychological evaluation, digging into his personal history, his childhood, any trauma, we just don't have that information.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, trying to get inside the head of a serial killer, it can be risky. You don't want to end up like almost glorifying what they did.
Right. I mean, it's important to remember that focusing too much on the perpetrator can distract from the real focus, which should be the victims.
The victims and their story.
Exactly. It's their lives that were stolen, and it's their families who have to live with this unimaginable loss.
And it's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of a case like this. But we can't forget the human cost. These were real people.
Real people with loved ones, and those loved ones will never forget. And, even though the justice system, well, maybe it didn't fully hold Jennings accountable for all of his alleged crimes, I think it is important to remember that it was the continued investigations, and the advancements in forensic science that allowed for those later connections to be made. That in itself gives hope for other cold cases.
That maybe families who have been waiting for answers might finally get some closure. It reminds me that justice can still prevail, even years later. It makes you think about those families, though, What kind of support did they have? How do you even begin to cope with a loss like that? And then to have to wait for answers for so long.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. The impact of these crimes extends so far beyond the immediate victims. The trauma, the grief, the fear, all of that. Those families carry those burdens for years, sometimes decades. We really need to do better in our society to provide more support for victims of violence and their families.
You're absolutely right. Like providing counseling, resources, legal assistance, all of that's critical. But it also goes deeper, doesn't it? It's about creating a culture of empathy and understanding, a society where victims feel supported and empowered to speak out.
Definitely. We have to move away from blaming victims and instead hold perpetrators accountable. Create a safer world for everybody.
It's a tough issue, no easy solutions. But it's something we can't shy away from. We have to keep talking about it. We've spent this whole time looking at the darkness of this case, the awful crimes, the legal back and forth, the long-lasting impact on the victims and their families. But I think it's important to end on a note of hope. What can we learn from a case like this? How can we use what we've learned to create a more just and compassionate world? We've really uncovered some disturbing stuff about Wilbur Lee Jennings and his crimes. It's easy to get lost in all the darkness, but I think we need to find some takeaways, some glimmers of hope in all of this. What lessons can we learn from a case like this?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is the importance of, never giving up on justice. The fact that DNA evidence came to light years after Jennings was convicted,
Yeah,
linking him to 2 more murders, it's like a reminder that the truth is out there. Sometimes it just takes time.
yeah, it shows how important forensic science is and how much it's evolved. I mean, who knows how many other cold cases could be solved if we keep investing in these technologies.
Exactly. And it's not just about solving old crimes. It's also about making sure our justice system is as accurate as possible, both now and in the future. I mean, these advances in forensics can help identify the guilty, but they can also help clear people who were wrongly convicted.
Yeah, that's huge. It shows that justice it's a process, it's always evolving. But going back to this case, one thing that really stuck with me is the impact on the victims' families.
Oh, absolutely. The
Yeah.
trauma, the grief, the fear. I mean, families carry that burden for so long, sometimes forever. It really highlights the need for better support systems for victims of violence and their families.
Yeah, we need to provide more resources, counseling, legal assistance, all of that. But it's also about creating a culture where victims feel safe coming forward, where they know they'll be heard and believed.
Totally. We need to stop blaming the victims and start holding the perpetrators accountable.
Mm.
It's the only way to create a safer world for everyone.
So for those listening, what can you take away from all of this deep dive into the dark world of Wilbur Lee Jennings?
Well, I think it's a call to action. We all have a part to play in creating a safer and more just world. It could be supporting organizations that fight for victims' rights. It could be volunteering your time to help people who've been affected by violence. Or even just, being aware of the signs of abuse and speaking up if you see something that doesn't seem right. Every little bit helps.
That's so true. We're not powerless. We can all make a difference. And even though our deep dive into the life and crimes of Wilbur Lee Jennings is ending here, I encourage you to keep learning, keep digging. There's always more to discover. The victims' stories, the investigations, the impact on the whole community.
Yeah, don't let this be the end. Keep asking questions. And most importantly, never forget the victims. Keep their memory alive.
And remember, even though we've been talking about a really dark part of human history, there's always hope. We can learn from the past, prevent future tragedies, and create a world where everyone feels safe and valued. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep fighting the good fight.